I want to talk a little bit about why our bodies feel a certain way when we're interpreting certain emotions, because I think a lot of times people have symptoms that feel like illness, physical illness, when really it has more to do with our thoughts and how that's affecting our body. So could you give us a little bit of insight onto that?
Sure. 80 to 90% of the physical ailments on the planet are from the mind, from anxiety. So we have a vagus nerve. We have 12 nerves that come off the brain, and one of them's called the vagus nerve, and it goes to all the organs and glands, and it tells them which hormones to secrete. So if we believe we're in fight or flight, and that's our norm, that vagus nerve is going to tell the body to behave a certain way. It's going to tell, okay, forget about digestion, forget about growth. We're just going to focus on giving energy to the muscles and, giving hormones, epinephrine or adrenaline instead, or cortisol instead of like a dopamine.
Somebody who's in fight or flight on a consistent basis would be maybe somebody who feels unsafe in a relationship or feels just like chronically stressed. They're just constantly trying to, just so we could put some perspective onto, why you would feel that way.
Well, totally too. And after like 30 years of spending with the body in that state, the body thinks that's the norm. So the body's feeling it, but it doesn't know why. So it asks the mind what's going on. So the mind will come up with reasons to support our body feeling that way. So it's a matter of recognizing that. And the thing about it is, growth is often uncomfortable, and it takes us to a weird place. Like for instance, if I ask you to put your hands together, that's okay, it feels normal. But if I ask you to move your hands down like 2 or 3 fingers, it starts to feel odd, and I want to stop because it feels odd. That odd sensation is growth. So that's where we want to go, because we haven't been there before. So we're creating a new habit. So by creating new habits, we're going to have odd sensations, and our mind's going to tell us to stop. Well, this isn't normal. This is what we're not usually doing. The body says, I usually get these chemicals.
That's why people are so resistant to change.
Totally.
Yeah.
And there's another reason behind that too is, when we're in fight or flight, we're in our mind, and the mind's happy. You're playing with me. But as soon as we start doing breathing exercises or doing things that separates the mind is aware of this, and it says, hey, you don't need to do this, you're good, you know what I mean? So whenever you're doing an activity that you know you're going to benefit from, and your mind's telling you to stop, that's, you're going in the right direction, because you're making a change, you're getting growth, you're going to a new spot, because you can't change without going to a different place.
Yeah. So I was just thinking, what came up for me then is I'm thinking like, okay, how do you decipher between the discomfort of change and your gut instinct telling you something is wrong? Because it feels the same in your body, when you get that gut instinct that is about that primal instinct of safety versus the instinct of this is what feels normal for me, right? So, but it all comes down to the same darn thing, which is basically just stop and breathe and observe, because the answer will come. It will always come to you, right? But in that moment when we react, we're always reacting to the primal instinct as opposed to the instinct of uncomfortable growth.
And you can't fix an entangled mind by using an entangled mind. You can't use a broken tool to fix a broken tool, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's why you had that breathing and separating, because that elongating of the exhale was what reverses fight or flight.
And in our previous video, you were saying that even if it's just 5 minutes of breathing is enough as a starter place, let's say, for people to begin to untangle the patterns of the mind so that we can, repattern them in a way that's going to be beneficial to our growth.
Totally.
So that's a good thing, I think, for people to know, that it doesn't take an hour of meditating every day necessarily. I mean, if you can do it, great. But for most of us, 5 minutes is it's a challenge, and if we can do it just once a day, 5 minutes, do you think that's enough? Yeah,
that's plenty. That's great. Yeah,
awesome.
And
okay,
that's huge. And and especially after a few weeks, when it becomes a habit, then the body, once it starts, the body, because I know where we're going, I'm going to the relaxation, it starts heading there on its own, kind of thing. And I talk about the vagus nerve. People say about mental illness, about a chemical imbalance. And I believe that's the mind, like the pituitary gland and so forth, and all telling the body that we're in fight or flight. So it makes these chemicals, and our habits keep us in there. But I prefer to use the term like mental unawareness, because when we become aware that we can separate from the mind, we can separate from memory, we can separate from imagination and be present, then we can start getting the growth and getting chemicals or hormones in our body that we do want, that
Right.
rest and digest and so forth.
And don't you think that's really empowering for people? You know, because I think so much of the stigma that's attached to anxiety and depression is this feeling of powerlessness, like you don't have control.
So
And
it's
we
unaware.
feel very much that way.
It's that unawareness of
Yeah.
that. It's totally, people don't realize, oh no, you can.
You
And
can.
that's
Yeah.
the entanglement of the mind makes us think that, you know, oh, I have this label on me, I can't do anything about it. I can use it as an excuse, whatever.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, I know that's a place to start from.
Yeah. And I think that the progression is often so it's very slow, that it feels like for the person who wants relief so quickly that it's not gratifying, you know, so therefore again you fall right back into the old pattern of just giving up and making excuses. But if that's the seed that you can plant, I think at the beginning of this shift, that, you know, you're not going to necessarily feel a big change right away, but it's going to be so slight and incremental every single day that even at the end of a week you're going to notice, but you might not notice the first day.
Here's how I approach it is, before I start, how do I feel? Give me a 1 out of 10. And I'll do 5 minutes of breathing or 5 minutes of meditation, and then see what that number is then. So if I see an improvement, then I know that what's going on. And
Right.
I also recommend when that exercise or breathing or meditation, whatever you choose to do, when that is complete, to go journal. Go write that down. Go write how you're feeling, and you can go back and
So you
look.
have a reference point.
And
Yeah.
also, I find that journaling, it starts to open up stuff. You get deeper and you start exploring, because it starts opening up, you know, what you're feeling really, and what your thoughts are, and you get to learn more about yourself, because it starts to open up, you know, and explore.
I'm really excited to hear that from a male perspective, because journaling is something that I have resisted for many, many years. I've started becoming more and more consistent with it over the last few years, but when talking with a man about it, you know, it's not something that a lot of men are comfortable coming out and saying that they do either. So I appreciate that you are honest about that, and just encouraging that for everybody, because I think it is important. I think also too that, you know, with our modern technology nowadays, it's journaling can be done with your voice too, right? Like you can make voice recordings and just talk about things as well, which is really interesting to go back, because you can hear in your own voice
Totally.
then, you know, the stress and the strain
For
or the
sure.
relaxation and that. So there's more than one way to go about it. And I think the other thing that also I thought about is, like, when you are in that state of, I like when you said start from, you know, pick a number from 1 to 10 about how you're feeling at the start. You know, when you're feeling a 10, like those moments are, you know, it's like those are the moments where you feel like exacerbated and you just want to do something. It's in those moments, if you can remember to stop and breathe, because the change will be so dramatic, you know, from when you recognize that 10. Stop in that moment, even if it's just for a minute, and give 3 or 4 big breaths, and see how you can drop down even to an 8. You know, you might not drop down to a 5, but that is huge, right? It gives you a really good representation. So I love that analogy too, of giving yourself a bit of a scorecard. You know, I know we're not supposed to judge ourselves, but it kind of is, right? It is a little bit of a
measurement.
reference card.
Yeah, it's a reference of progress.
Yeah, it's not really a judgment.
Yeah.
Don't attach judgment.
Well, you can
Yeah.
just journal that right there.
Yeah.
I am, you know, and
Yeah.
not be hard on yourself. You know, there's no wrong or right. It's just, when I do this is the results that take place. When
Yeah.
I choose to do that, these are the results that take place.
Yeah.
So it's a matter
Yeah.
of like, again, about self-love, to say, you know what, no matter what takes place, I can make a change. Tomorrow I don't have to stay here, just because
Yeah.
I'm here now.
Yeah. I think it's hard for people that aren't accustomed to the idea of loving themselves to go into that place when they're in the state of, like, say 8 to 10 of whatever it is they're experiencing. Is there anything that you could advise based on your experience, how to just, like, bring yourself into the concept of even loving yourself when you're in that place of just really honestly hating yourself?
Sure.
Sometimes?
I think a lot of it's based on fear and vulnerability, and understanding that and making that separation, because fear doesn't attach to us, we attach to fear. So it's a matter, we're the ones that are holding on to it, it's not holding on to us. So understanding, okay, there's a fear here that's making me feel vulnerable, or it's a fear that's making me not want to do something, and it's a fear that's making me uncomfortable. And as we mentioned before, like, that recognition is the first step. Once you're like, okay, that what I'm doing is fear based, and then we can say, okay, now I can start to let that go and use cognitive behavior to say, okay, actually I'm feeling this, but in actuality, I'm good, I'm healthy, I'm in a good place, or whatever, talk ourselves and say, and let that go. But it's a practice of, again, just as breathing is a practice of letting go of fear and being comfortable in that place of vulnerability and authenticity. And then when you get that authenticity, you get that self-love, and you get comfortable with yourself, and then that makes the self-love even grow more, and the authenticity grow more, and then the vulnerability dissipates and goes away, and the fear can start to go away. But yeah, like I said, it's not, as you mentioned, it's not like, okay, I do it or not, it's a progress.
Yeah, because I think the fear, like, what does that look like in people's minds? Because fear can be everything from rejection, I think, is a lot. The idea of just being accepted by those that we love, and even strangers. Unfortunately, a lot of times they have more power, because we know people love us, like our families or our partners or whatever, but we're so affected by the opinions of others that is actually a heavier weight for a lot of people. So there's that idea of rejection, not being good enough. It all kind of, like,
that's a judgment.
Yeah.
It's all judgment.
So it's so much of that vulnerability comes back to judgment again, and that's
I'm going to be judged, so I'm just going to sit and do nothing.
I'm just going to do nothing. Yeah.
That's the fear. The fear of that is, if you go a little deeper, it's like the fear. So, like I said, having the label of vulnerability, going deeper into fear and changing the label to say, okay, this is fear actually, and then sitting in it, and, like, as you were, like, for the sitting in the rage, sitting in that fear and surrendering to it, and knowing you're going to be fine, things are going to grow, or you're going to get benefits from it.
Yeah, I think from the very beginning of when I started doing this, I accepted that basically everything that we feel comes from one of two places: fear or love. Even rage comes from a place of fear, right? Because we're afraid for our safety. We're afraid for our for our existence. So it's we go into protection mode, which is the first instinctual thing that comes up when fear is, like, fight, right, or flight. Like you said, you run. If you can't fight, you run. But love is the antidote for all of it. And finding how we can shift our thoughts and our feelings. Just using those two simple words somehow made it easier for me. It was less complex. It was like I didn't have to really analyze each feeling and why I was feeling them and where it came from and where can I find forgiveness and where can I find. It was just move from fear to love. How do you do that? And it was a good starting place. And then after you've kind of got there, then going back and maybe starting to do a little bit more of the deeper work. But initially, when you're in that state,
for sure,
I found that to be easier, and it's just nice to kind of hear that more complex observation from your perspective.
Totally, yeah. If you're in your fight or flight, you're not going to have the clarity to be as a good observer of yourself. Also, I was told there's 3 levels. There's green, which is good. There's yellow, it's fight or flight, and then there's red, which is freeze. So the person's not.
That's true. Forgot about freeze there.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you just have no reaction at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, which makes you, like, instant prey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for that perspective, Paul, and I look forward to exploring this a little more deeply. Thanks again.
Thank you.